Hello coders, this is Jared with Renaissance Coders, and in this video we are going to cover another aspect of the CineMachine tool in Unity 2017.1. For this video we are going to be focusing on creating a group target camera that will target a group of AI characters in our scene. Now you coders may have to do some initial setup here if you have not been following along with our 2017.1 new feature series. So if you haven't been following along, then you will need to pull in the character standard asset pack from Unity, and you will have to import CineMachine from the asset store. You can go ahead and pause the video if you have not imported those already, but if you just feel like watching the setup, that is cool too. Okay, now let's take a really quick look at what we are actually going to be creating. Okay, in our scene here, we can just see that we've got a really basic just layout. I've sort of created a funnel that will push our AI characters inward to some destinations here. I've set up a couple of light probe groups with some point lights just to make it a little bit prettier and everything like that, and I've got my group target camera set up here as well. So when I press play, we can see that the AI characters start to walk into our scene. We can see that the camera FOV is updating, and it's also moving backwards in a dolly motion. And our characters will continue to move forward until they reach their final destination, and this is where the light probe groups and everything like that comes into play. Finally, we reach our destination and the AI characters stop moving, and so does our group target camera. Okay, so let's go ahead and stop that. Okay, so this new tool is pretty cool, and the group target component of CineMachine really gives us a lot of flexibility for cutscenes and things like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to set up the scene and play with CineMachine group target camera. Now, I am actually going to fast forward through the scene setup because that isn't really the important aspect of this video. So let's go ahead and save our current scene. We're going to create a new one, and I'm going to fast forward through the design process. Okay coders, so now I've got my basic scene set up. Again, it's just sort of a very similar setup where we're going to have the characters start off pretty spread out over here, and then they're going to come together and move down this sort of hallway, transitioning through the light probe groups before they reach destinations down here. Now I do need to go ahead and set up the destinations for them as well. So to do that, I can just right click, create empty, and I can just zero out the position at first because I really want to get pretty close in here so I can get them all lined up like I want. So it looks like a value of 10 in the Z is gonna work pretty well. And then I'm just gonna move them, let's go -1. Hopefully that's enough space for them. So let's go ahead and duplicate this, and we're just gonna shift it -1 in the X and +1 in the X. Now when I select all of these, they're basically, we're seeing the center point here, but they're basically all going to be right here. Another thing I actually want to do is actually go ahead and clean up the hierarchy. Right now it's kind of a mess, so to do that we can just do some empty objects. Okay, the other thing that I actually want to do is go ahead and mark all of my objects as static. So I can just select them and mark them as static here. You can see from me doing that, it's actually rebuilding the lighting for us. That may take a little bit because that's a lot of lights right there. A lot of lighting information in there. Okay, the next thing I actually want to do while the light's building out, I can just toggle down my level, and I'm going to go ahead and actually add in my characters. So I'm going to go to the Assets folder, to Standard Assets, Characters, Third Person Character, click on the prefabs. I'm actually going to just be using the AI third person controller here, and I can just sort of drop them in. Actually, I'm going to drop this first one in, and I'm going to try and zero out the position. And now let's actually move it back where we want it. So I want it sort of like right there. That looks pretty good, right outside of the light initially. And now I'm just going to duplicate it, and I'm going to move this one like -5. Let's go -7. There we go. -7 looks pretty good. And I'm going to duplicate it one more time, and this one I'm going to move to +7 in the X. Okay, now we've got these guys dragged into our scene, which is awesome, but we actually need to do one other thing before we can even use these guys, and that's actually bake a Navmesh. So if we go to our navigation tab up here in the right, and if you don't have that, you can just go to Window, and you should see navigation in here. There it is, down close to the bottom. So if you don't have that, be sure to open it up and you should see something like this. And it's important that you mark your game objects as static, because if they're not static, then the Navmesh runs into some issues. So once we have that all completed, we can come in here and just click bake. Okay, so it's telling me I need to save my scene, so let's go ahead and save it to the scenes folder, and I'm just going to call this one group target demo. Okay, so now that's baked out and we can actually see it in our scene. Looks pretty cool here. So this is going to be the walkable area of our AI characters. If you've seen my other AI series, then you know sort of what this does and how this all works. We're not really concerned with this right now. We're primarily concerned with the CineMachine group target. So let's go ahead and actually get started on that. So I'm going to go back to my inspector first, and now let's actually go up to CineMachine here in the top, and we can just scroll down to the second to last option, which is create group target camera. So if I click this guy, it immediately creates it in our scene. As we can see here, it's going to create it at 000. So it actually creates the target group at 000, but our virtual camera is like 10 in the Z back from that camera position. And as you can see, this actually sets up a couple of values for us immediately on our virtual camera. So looking at our virtual camera here, we can see that we already have a look at setup and a follow setup, which is our target group 1. If we go into our aim, we can see that we are now using a group composer, and we've got a few different options in here that we're going to step into a little bit later. Now let's take a look at our target group. Now when I click on my target group, it's empty because obviously we haven't added anything to this target group yet. But let's go ahead and set these up now. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on the plus icon here, and this allows me to select a transform to use as my target. Now we don't want to just drag in this prefab, because if we do, if I click on the prefab, our center position, let me focus up on this guy. Our center position will actually be chosen at the feet. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like. I'll select it again and just drop in this transform, and now we can see that it's actually going to look at the feet. So if I click on my game view here, my virtual camera, we can see that we're actually looking like at the feet. Technically, we're right at his feet right now. So we don't really want that. Instead, what we want to do is click on our target group. We want to pick a bone on this character to actually look at. So if I just go click on this character really quickly and toggle down, we've got a couple of options here: the body, glasses. We've got the skeleton as well though. So we definitely want to use the skeleton for this. We've got the hips, and if you click, you can actually see the transforms going throughout this character. So this is the hips transform, we've got the spine transform, the left leg, right leg, and then another spine, which is about middle of the back, another spine a little higher up, and then we've got the neck here, and we've also got head, left, and right shoulder. So I'm actually going to use my neck transform here. We could also use the head as well, so it's really a little bit of personal preference. I used the neck in my demonstration, so I'm going to go ahead and use that again. Now, to set this up, all we have to do is click on our target group, and then we just want to drag this transform into here, and now we can see that we're actually going to be at his neck position here. So all we have to do is toggle this guy down, and we want to click the plus icon again to add another one, and just find that transform again. So we want to go all the way down here to neck, click on our target group, and just drag in the neck here. Now you can see that since I now have two targets in my target group, that the camera has actually moved to like a center point between those two targets. So it's figuring out where it needs to be placed based on how these targets are actually spread out. So let's go ahead and set up our final one on my target group. I'm just going to click another plus icon, and for my third AI character, just go through this process again down to where I can find the neck. There it is, target group, and drag this neck in. And now we can see that it's actually moved even farther back because it's trying to get everyone into focus. Okay, so right now we have our position mode on our target group set to group center. And of course, our objects are split out equally amongst each other, so our center position is going to be basically right at this guy's neck position because he is actually the center position right now. If I had not done exact measurements on how far they were spread out, then this guy's neck may not be our actual center position. So another thing we can change this to though is group average. And when we change that, again, it's not going to change all that much, but that's okay. We're going to go with group average for this. We're also going to have our rotation mode set to manual here. You can go to group average as well. When we do that, we get a little bit of weirder behavior, and this is probably because I don't fully understand how CineMachine is doing all the math in this, but this is basically our group average rotation mode, which gets a little difficult to work with at times. And one thing you may have noticed if you've worked with target groups is that you can't actually update these positions like this. So basically what the target group is doing for us is it's figuring out all of this stuff based on the input we're giving it. But again, I'm just going to leave it to manual for this demonstration. Okay, now we actually want to go to our virtual camera here, because this is what we're going to need to work on in order to get our camera set up like I want. Again, we can go to our game view and we can actually see that all three of our characters are actually in view. But I definitely want to change this up a little bit more because I don't necessarily like the way that is actually looking. One thing, well, let's change it up a little bit. Let's try this. What we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create a really quick script that allows us to move the characters, and we can just test some different settings. Let's do it that way. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our scripts folder. We're going to right click, create a C# script, and we can just call this move character. Now let's go ahead and open this guy up. Okay, and this is actually going to be a really simple script. There's not a whole lot of logic we need in order to get the characters moving. Unity has actually done a lot of that work themselves with the AI characters, but we are going to have to add a using and a namespace to this script to actually get it to work. So we're going to need to add the using Unity engine.ai here. So we need that so we can actually access the Navmesh. And we also need to add a namespace, and we need the namespace Unity standard assets.characters third person. So basically we're using their third person character, so we need to have it namespaced or we'll run into some issues. So let's go ahead and actually cut that class out and put it inside of our namespace here. Didn't paste as prettily as I would like it to. That's okay though, we can fix that. Okay, very cool. Let's actually add another space up here just so we can clearly see the difference between the namespace and the class. And now we need basically three variables. We're going to need a Navmesh agent, a third person character, and a transform for our end target. So let's go ahead and set those up. We're going to create a public Navmesh agent that we can just call agent. We're going to need a public third person character that we can just call our character. And we're going to need a public transform that we can just call our target. And this target is basically where we want our AI to actually move to. So we do have to do a little bit of initialization with this script. We're going to have to set up our Navmesh agent. We're going to set up the third person character controller, and we have to set up a few options for our agent as well. So let's go ahead and do an agent is equal to get component type of Navmesh agent. And we're going to set our character is equal to a get component of our third person character. Now we need to go ahead and set up some options for our Navmesh agent. We're going to set our Navmesh agent dot update position equal to true. And we're going to set up our agent dot update rotation equal to false. So the third person character script can actually handle the rotation, so we don't need our Navmesh to do that for us. So the last thing we actually need to set up here is our agent speed. So with a speed of 1, our character will actually be running, which isn't as awesome looking when they're going through those lights. So we're going to change our agent.speed equal to like 0.5 f. So the last thing we actually need to do is fill out our update function. So inside of our update function, we can just say if vector3.distance between transform.position and our target.position. So we need to get the vector 3s from our transform is, let's say if it's greater than or equal to 2, then we want to actually move towards that target. So we're going to do an agent.set destination, and the destination we want to actually set is going to be our target.position here. So if we are a certain distance away from our target, we want to continuously move towards that target. The last thing we actually need to do is tell our character script that we want to move, so it's pretty easy. We can just say character.move, and we want to use our agent.desired velocity, and we just have to pass in 2 false values here. Oops, too many commas. There we go. Okay, now that's all we actually need for the script, so let's go ahead and actually save it, and we can just go back out to our scene. Whoops, did I misspell character? Oh, I misspelled assets. Make sure you spell assets correctly when you do this. So I put the S in the wrong spot. I put it before the T. It needs to be after the T, obviously. So let's go ahead and save that. Sorry about that, guys. A little bit of a typing error. Okay, and now our error is gone. Awesome. Okay, now what we can actually do is go ahead and just click on all of our AI characters here. We can scroll down to the bottom of them, go to our project, scripts folder, and we're just going to move in our move character. Very cool. Now for each of these, we actually need to set up the end targets. So I'm just going to toggle down my level again, and it should be the 3 game objects down here. So I could have named those target position or target, but for now that's fine. We're gonna just click on the first one, and we're gonna move it to the center one, which should be the first one here. So be sure to set your target up. Now for our second target, it's the one on the left. So we definitely want to give that to our left character, which should be this guy. And now for our third one, we're just going to pass in the last game object, empty game object there. Okay, so that should really be all that we need to do to get this initially set up and running. So now if I actually go ahead and press play, I haven't changed any values for the virtual camera now, so they're moving. We can see that our camera is going through the wall now, but it is actually keeping everyone in focus. We've got a little bit of jitter going on, but it's definitely keeping everyone in focus, and we're following the group. Okay, and there was a big FOV shift right at the end, but it still has everyone in our scene, or everyone within our camera. And as you can see now, our FOV is actually shifting, and that's probably occurring because of their swaying in the idle animation. Okay, let's go ahead and stop that now, because now we actually want to get this looking like we want it to look, right? That's the whole purpose of CineMachine, is to create amazing looking things using this tool. So let's go ahead and actually click on our virtual camera here, because this is where we actually need to set up all of our values. Initially, we can see that we've just got a lot of the same values from a typical main camera. We've got the field of view, but we do have a Dutch value here, and if you haven't played with Dutch value, it just basically like rotates the camera around. So if I go to my game view now, I can actually play with the Dutch value. We can see what it's doing there. Of course, I want to go with a value of 0 though. I want a pretty stationary camera. Now the next thing we can actually play with is a near plane clip and a far plane clip here. We can of course increase this a little bit, and as we can see, it's going to cut off some of the wall, but I don't really necessarily want that for this. So let's go into the aim module here. We can see that we've got the group composer set up. It's showing guides. Without the guides, it just sort of removes that overlay that we have that is actually pretty useful. The next thing we can see is we have a tracked object offset, and we can actually play with this a little bit, and it's going to sort of rotate our camera around to do a certain offset. So we can do like the Y, the X, the Y, and the Z, and this is pretty interesting really, because it's based on that center value. So if you think about it, we're moving closer in the Z and farther away in the local Z of this camera. And then we are doing like a Y turn based on the center positioning, and we're going to do an X rotation as well. But we're going to leave those set to what they are, as well as the horizontal and vertical dampening, and really all of these other values here. We're not really concerned with these right now. We can of course come back and look at them a little bit later, but the next thing I want to look at is our group framing size. So we can play with this a little bit, and this will actually allow us to easily cut off people within our group, and it basically changes the way that we look at our group. So I can easily change this to like 0.85, and now we have a framing mode. So right now we have horizontal and vertical selected. I can go with vertical, or I can go with horizontal, or I can go with both. I like the way horizontal and vertical looks. Horizontal looks exactly the same, and vertical sort of removes this guy, but it's playing with our FOV, I believe. It looks like it is. It doesn't look like the value changed here. So we're just going to go with horizontal and vertical here. Okay, so the next option we have here is adjustment mode, which has 3 options in it. We have a zoom only, a dolly only, or a dolly then zoom. So basically what this allows us to do is change how our camera should adjust based on the group's positioning. So if we do a zoom only, for example, and press play, then our camera is just going to adjust the FOV, and it is actually moving its position a little bit, but it's basically adjusting the FOV to focus on how far away these people actually are. And of course, this isn't set up very well for this mode because, of course, our camera is looking through a wall. So we can easily fix that though. So let's go ahead and stop this. Let's go back into our aim here. And I'm actually going to set it back to dolly, then zoom for now. And now we're actually going to play with the minimum and maximum distance. So our minimum distance right now is 0. Of course, I can increase this, and we're not going to see a big change here because this is the minimum distance. If I were to drastically increase it, then we'll see we are moving farther and farther away. But I definitely don't want my camera to be that far away. So I'm just going to set it to a value of 1 for now. So we definitely want to maintain at least some distance from our characters. The other thing I'm going to do is actually reduce my maximum distance down. So right now it's at a value of 5,000, but I definitely don't want it to be that far away, so I can easily drop this down to like 10. If we drop it down to 1, we can see that we're really close in on this character, so that will give us a really fixed shot on this character. So let's go ahead and press play and see what it tries to do now. So now you can see that it's basically trying to track this character specifically, and it's trying to get that average, but I don't think it'll ever reach it. It may reach it at the end when the last guy actually pops in. Basically, the last guy's like right off the camera's field of view here. There he is. Okay, so it's really never going to get all three in our shot, so we definitely don't want that either. So let's go back into our module here, and I'm actually going to set a maximum distance of like 7. Okay, and of course that's going to cut this guy off, but we are going to adjust the positioning of our camera so that we can see the first one initially, and then the second two will come into view. Okay, we also have options for minimum and maximum FOV, so I can change this up pretty easily. I can change it to like 5, and let's go 55. And we won't really see a difference in there until we start playing with it and seeing how the camera is actually adjusting. This just adds additional restrictions to our camera and really gives us a lot more control over the scene or the cutscene as a whole. Okay, so now let's actually go into our body, because this is where we want to do a lot of the work. So as we can see here, we've got our follow offset, and right now we only have a follow offset in the Z, which is a -10. So let's actually play with this and see what happens. Right now, not a whole lot is happening. So let's click on our scene here and see what we can do to play with this. Now we can see that this is going to change around the follow offset of our camera. So if I move it to this side, the camera moves to the other side of our group here. If I move it this way, it moves to that side. And of course, this is using local transform, so our Z is actually this way. What I really want is my camera to be out in front of our characters. So I can actually move it to like 0 in the Z, which is going to be right on our center character. And I can actually move it in the X as well. So if I increase the X, we can see it's moving backwards. But if I decrease in the X, we can see it moves forward a little bit, which is sort of what we want. And of course, I can play with the Y as well. And the Y just sort of gives us an angle adjustment based on the characters. Now, this is really important as well. Right now, our binding mode is set to lock to target with world up. And we have a couple of other options in here as well. We have lock to target on a sign, lock to target no roll, lock to target, and world space. So in my demonstration, I actually had it set to world space. So we can click on world space and see what this looks like in world space. So in world space, with the current settings that I just played with, we can see that it's like looking basically right down all three of these guys. So it's going to be set up looking basically down at them in a line, which is again, not exactly what we want here. Of course, we can play with this a little more. I kind of want an upwards angle looking at them. And I definitely don't want it to be looking at them like this. Let's try to get our X kind of centered here. And now let's play with our Z a little bit. Try to get, actually I'm going to go to our game view here so we can try to get exactly the look we want. So that's a pretty good look there. So that's actually a pretty solid starting point. So let's go ahead and press play again and just see what this does for us. Okay, so now we're in play mode. We can see that the FOV and the dolly is actually working. So right now the FOV seems to be staying pretty much the same, but we are sliding backwards. And there the FOV shifted again. So that's actually a pretty cool shot. I actually really like the way that looked. But we can play with some additional options here. So right now, again, we're in world space. We can go to lock to target on a sign. And when we do that, it basically just changes up those values again for us. And again, we can go to scene view to see what we're actually looking at in our camera. And we can play with these values again. So we're going to X right now. And that's just going to sort of rotate it down or up. And we can go with our Y, which is again going to rotate to the left and right here. And we can go to our Z, which again is sort of going left and right here. But I really like the way the world space looked. So the one thing I'm noticing here though is that our group is really sort of off-centered here. So let's actually try to play with this and get it exactly the way we want it. I'm going to set it to 0 in the X so that we're actually looking like right at that guy. Now let's actually go back to our aim module here and let's change this up so that it only does dolly. So we only want it to dolly in and out. We don't want it adjusting the FOV of our camera. So let's go ahead and press play and see what this looks like now. Okay, so as we can see, let me click off of that. So as we can see, it's just dollying back, and we definitely ran into a little bit of jitter there while they were rounding the corners, and it's still going to be dollying back all the way. And it's still maintaining those distances as well. So there we go, it stops. It kind of looked like the FOV shifted a little bit there, but I couldn't really tell if it did or not, but again, that's okay. So that's definitely pretty cool, and it's really up to you on how you want to set up your cutscenes. I kind of like the way the FOV, or dolly then zoom, actually works, and I believe the zoom's affecting the FOV. It certainly looks like it's affecting the FOV. But one thing we can actually do to get even more control over the shots we're getting in our cutscene is play with the FOV. So right now, if I go to my game, I can see that I can actually get all three of these guys in the initial shot here, but I could, of course, decrease my maximum FOV down a little bit so that we start off with just this guy in the beginning, and and I could change the minimum FOV as well, just so that we don't zoom in too much. Okay, now let's take a look at this one and see how that turned out. So again, we're starting off kind of far from our characters. We did get a little bit of jitter there again when they're rounding those corners, but they're definitely coming towards us. We've got a little bit of a downward angle, incorporating all of our characters walking through those lights. It's kind of creepy, you know, seeing these three guys just sort of walk at you like that. But it's definitely a pretty cool cutscene, too. You could definitely do, you know, like, sort of reminds me of, like, stormtroopers or something, you know, like marching down a hallway. So let's try one more thing here. I'm going to go back into my virtual camera here, because I don't really like the way that that FOV or the jitter is occurring when they're rounding the corners. So what I can do is actually play with the minimum and maximum distance, and of course we can play with the max dolly in and max dolly out as well. They're set to values of 5,000 right now, but I don't really want to get super granular on that right now. So we could play with zoom only again. So let's try this one and see how this looks with just the minimum and maximum FOV settings without the dolly. So now we can see that it's moving backwards still. We did adjust the FOV a little bit there. And we are getting more jitter like this, but I do like this shot way more. Like this, that looks way better to me. Oh, right until the end. Okay, so I definitely like the way that shot looked the most. So what we're gonna do to fix that is go back to our scene mode, and we can actually move our camera closer. So let's go to our body again, and let's mess with the Z a little bit, because I definitely don't want it falling out of view, and we're gonna drop down the Y just a little bit since we moved in a little bit closer. Okay, now let's try this one more time here. Okay, so here they come. Did the little jitter again. But I definitely like that shot. That's a pretty cool looking shot we've got going on there. I definitely like it right towards the end too, when they start getting like really close like that. Like that's pretty cool. Okay, so that's definitely pretty cool. Okay, coders, so let's go through a few more things just to kind of make this a little bit cooler. I know this tutorial is running a little bit longer, but I do want to cover several options that we have available to us and just sort of show you some ways to make these cutscenes really cool. So one thing that I'm noticing right now is that our scene is actually really, really bright. And one thing we can do is actually add some dark walls to add some contrast and sort of light up the characters a little bit more. So you may have noticed that in my demonstration at the beginning of this video, I had the red walls. So I'm just going to go to my materials. I've got a red material here that is just the standard shader. So I can go ahead and actually add this to my walls here. So that adds a little more contrast almost immediately to our level. One thing you may notice though is that we've got a pretty high polish on these walls right now. But that's actually really easy to fix. We can just reduce the smoothness on our walls, and that just makes them pretty flat here. I am noticing a little bit of some artifacts being rendered on our walls. So I could go down to the lighting. Right now it says it's auto-generating, but doesn't look like it is. Okay, so I'm definitely not liking the way that's blending on that wall right there, but one thing I could do is change that up to be one solid piece. So now let's go down to our lights, choose our directional light. I'm just gonna move it up. It doesn't really matter, because since it's directional, it basically applies evenly over the scene based on the rotation of this light. I am going to play with the intensity a little bit, just drop the intensity down a little bit here. Definitely don't want it to be 0. There we go. Now let's see what this actually looks like in our scene. Okay, that's definitely pretty cool. Those walls are looking real vibrant right now. I definitely like the way that that looks though. That definitely added a little bit more. So one thing though here is there's not a light right in front of them. So obviously once they get to this point, the light is no longer showing up. So that's not awesome. And I'm really not liking the way the light's falling on these two objects here. So let's just select them. We're just going to delete them, and now we're going to play with the scale of these two guys. We need to update in the Z, so just update that a little bit, then we're just going to drag them back. Actually, let's make sure we're pretty close to the wall, yeah. Now, since we've actually done that, we need to actually rebuild our navigation. We probably don't actually have to, since it's the same basic shape, but I am going to go ahead and just bake it again. Okay, so that was a really quick bake. Nothing really changed. Okay, so let's go back to our inspector again, and now we can see the lights distributed a little bit better here. One thing I'm noticing is that my point lights are not showing up all that well here. So let's actually take a look at this now, because I definitely want to see this hallway lit up a little bit better. So now let's go ahead and press play, and I do know that the ends are still a little bit messed up, but that's okay for now. So here we go, they're red. Now they're going to be red and blue. Now green and yellow. Purple and orange. A little bit of blue over there. So now some green, and they stop. So I do need to move these point lights down here back a little bit. So let's click on these two guys, and we're just going to drag them back a little bit. Now let's go ahead and generate our lighting again. Okay, now it looks like our lighting has finished building out, so I'm going to go ahead and press play again, and we're just going to watch this, I think, one last time. It looks pretty good right now, so I think I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. We still get a little bit of shift there. My main concern is at the end, just making sure those green lights are showing up like they should. Okay, so we see the green popping on now. Very green. Okay, very cool. So that's exactly what I wanted to actually take a look at. Okay, coders, that is actually going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. We are, of course, going to continue making videos covering the 2017.1 new features, including those from CineMachine, Timeline, Post-Processing Stack. There's a lot more that we need to cover. Darren is going to be releasing another video covering the post-processing effects this week. He's going to step through each of those, giving as much information as possible so that you coders totally understand the new stack. I will continue diving through CineMachine, Timeline, and other features, just giving as much information about this new update as I can to you coders. Definitely let us know in the comments below if you are enjoying this series or if there's an aspect of 2017.1 that you would like to see covered, and we will definitely try to create those videos for you coders. Okay, coders, I hope that you enjoyed that video. We are constantly adding new videos here on YouTube. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It allows us to continue making great content for you coders. And if you are feeling extremely generous, please check out our Patreon account. Here are a few of our other tutorials just in case you want to keep on learning. If you become a patron of Renaissance Coders, you can get access to our source code and our project files as well. Okay, coders, that's going to do it for this video. As always, thanks for watching.